So I'm delighted to welcome Brendan to the podcast today. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Carl.
So let's start from the beginning. We're going to talk about the importance of network, but let's find out a bit more about you. So where was you born?
So I was born in Dorchester, in Dorset. That's Thomas Hardy country. So I grew up in Dorchester for the first few years of my life. My parents worked at a mental hospital, so I grew up around people with mental health problems and lots of cows. And then we moved to Poole. I went to grammar school there, and so I grew up very much in the country, and then on the south coast.
Yeah, and what was that like compared to the city where you're now based?
Well, I think as a youngster I was always fascinated by London. I always loved London. I remember my father brought me to London, I guess when I was about maybe 8 years old, and loved going on the underground, and really always wanted to come to London. So when it came to go to university, no surprise that I chose to come to London, and I've been here ever since. I absolutely love London. I love the energy, the passion, the creativity, the diversity. I just love everything about London.
And the building works, as we can hear outside.
London is constantly changing.
Yes.
I'm lucky to live opposite my office here, so I live in quite a small area of London. I know it very, very well, but of course it's changing. If you live in London, that's what a global city is like. It never stops. It's always changing.
And talk to me about that. Your parents working in mental health. What sort of things did you see, and what did you learn from that?
Well, I think looking back now, I guess they were ahead of their time in what they were doing. My father actually became a psychotherapist eventually, and my mother was a social worker. But I think over the years, mental health has become more and more stigmatised in this country.
Yes.
And we're spending less and less money on helping people with mental health issues, and this is, I think, a very sad state of affairs. Looking after people's mental health is just as important as looking after their physical health. Of course, with physical health, it's easier to see when somebody's not well. With mental health, you don't necessarily know what somebody's going through, so I think we need a lot more empathy, a lot more understanding, but a lot more investment in trying to help people cope when they have mental health issues.
And so you moved into London for your education. What did you do as your degree, and where did you go?
So I came to the London School of Economics, and I studied government, and loved every minute of it. Felt very lucky that I was doing that in the capital. Obviously studying government meant I was right by the House of Commons, which was a tremendous opportunity. London School of Economics, probably one of the greatest institutions to be studying at, and we had the most amazing guests. So I remember, for example, one day we had a tutorial all about the budget. Who was our guest? The Chancellor of the Exchequer. We had Ken Clarke come in because our lecturer had been best man at his wedding, so they were buddies. I mean, how lucky were we to have those opportunities to meet someone that was actually pretty much running the country at the time, come and talk to us for 2 hours about government, politics, budgets, how politics work. So just incredibly privileged.
Yes. And if we're mapping out your life at this point, what did you want to do that made you want to go into and look at the government as a degree?
Well, I felt that I was probably destined to be Prime Minister, so I felt I was at the perfect place. And bizarrely, I did in a sense get quite close to the world of power, because in my final year at university, I got a job, a voluntary research job, with somebody called Paul Boateng, who's quite a well-known politician, still is. And just before I was due to start, he phoned me and he said, "I'm really sorry to tell you, but I found somebody better, so I can't have you come and work for me, but I promise I will try and get you a position with somebody else." So you could say, well, that was bad luck and unfortunate, but he did help me, and he got me a job with somebody called Tony Blair.
Yes.
So it turned out to be quite a good move. So I worked for Tony Blair as just a part-time voluntary researcher between 94 and 95, which is the period in which John Smith was leader of the Labour Party, and then very sadly suffered a heart attack and died quite suddenly. And Tony Blair took over, so there I was in what became an extraordinary, energetic place.
Yes.
Well, we all know what happened from there. Actually, I didn't stay in the office because there was not enough room, so I ended up working for somebody else, somebody called Joyce Quinn, who was an extraordinary woman and Shadow Minister for Europe at the time. So I spent about a year working for her before I realised that politics was not paying a lot of money.
Yes.
And I have a funny story about that if you have time.
Yeah, no, go on.
So I was looking for a full-time job with a Member of Parliament, and there was an advert for such a role, and the MP's name was Jeremy Corbyn. Now obviously everybody knows Jeremy Corbyn now as the leader of the Labour Party. At the time, he was just a backbench MP, and he was doing research into minimum wage legislation. So I went for my interview, and then I went for another interview. I got into the final 2 of the process, only to find out that I had not been given the job. And as you can imagine, I was upset and disappointed.
Of course.
And, well, you might think this is a bit naughty, but the rate of pay that he was proposing to pay to his research was below the level of the minimum wage that he felt anybody across the country should be being paid. And I thought that was somewhat hypocritical. So
Yes.
I decided to write to Private Eye and say, you might be interested in this story. I had these interviews with Jeremy Corbyn, and actually the rate of pay he's proposing to pay to his researcher isn't even at the minimum wage legislation that he says he's going to be campaigning for. And this went into Private Eye. They didn't name me, but I was described as an eager young politico, which I was at the time. But then I decided maybe I need to do something different, because I could feel that perhaps politics wasn't what I was destined to do for the rest of my life.
So what did you enjoy out of that research role?
Well, I've always been very good at research. I mean, I think the skill of a researcher is being able to read large volumes of documents and condense them into the most important bits. In fact, I remember a time when Tony Blair was going on Question Time, and I'd been briefed to read an immigration paper, which is about 80 pages long, and then summarise it into 2 paragraphs, which I did. And then I remember he was on this programme being asked about this paper, and one of his political opponents said, "Have you read this paper?" And of course he said, "Of course I have." And I thought, actually I read it. I had read the paper for him, but he dealt with it very well, as he always did.
Yes.
So it was fun. I still enjoy the world of politics, but I think one of the reasons why I didn't go into politics is because sometimes I change my mind about things. I think we all do sometimes. When we think about issues, sometimes we make changes, and I think politicians aren't very good at that. So
Yes.
they're a little bit stuck in the mud and say, no, this is what we're going to do. And I think the beauty of running a business, and why I love running the business, is we decide what we're going to do. We're small, we're flexible, and when we make mistakes, we accept them and we change and we move on. Sometimes big companies, political parties, not very good at doing that. You've got to be adaptable to change. You've got to recognise when you make mistakes, you learn from them and you move on. Don't stick your head in the sand.
No, definitely good advice. So did you meet a lot of people in that role?
Not so much, during the political phase. I mean, I did come across people that went on to be notorious or well known
Yes.
in politics. But it's once I decided to leave the world of politics behind, I got more into business then.
Yes, and that step came in terms of working with speakers, is that correct?
Yeah, so in 1996 I decided to set up a company called Speakers for Business, which was essentially a speaker bureau. So that's a company that buys and sells people that deliver speeches on stage. In 1996, it's just over 20 years ago, the internet was only at the very, very beginning. I mean, for example, my first email address was a very long number at CompuServe.com, which was quite normal at the time. I mean, it was at the very beginning. So being a bureau at that time was quite a good thing to do, because I had access to people, because I'd had time in politics. I was quite well connected, so I was able to connect with politicians and others for companies that couldn't necessarily access them. Of course, it's completely different now. If you were to give me a name now, how do I contact whoever it might be? We could probably Google and find them within seconds.
Yes.
But 20 years ago, it wasn't like that. So I was effectively a gatekeeper. I could offer access to people that companies wanted to get to. And that's how my business first started.
And how did you get access to them people?
Well, through trying to meet as many people as I could. By knowing the right people, you were able to, all about networks, I guess, which is partly what this podcast is about. Building networks, you've got to be successful personally and professionally, is very, very important. And at that time, I think what it taught me was that personal connections are critical. I mean, now we live in an era of LinkedIn and other social networks, which are all very important. But they don't replace the personal touch, the personal, for example, we were talking about the fact I have a party this evening, so we have a party on our roof meadow, and we invite people that are important to us, particularly in terms of networks. So, personal relationships always trump online things. I'm not saying online isn't important too, but it's the personal side that's critical.
Yeah, the face-to-face.
Absolutely.
And then when let's go into how the London Business Forum, which is what you now run, how did that come about from there?
So it came about, I ran Speakers of Business for about 5 years, and it was running really, really well, and I was quite happy with it, but I was kind of frustrated in a sense that I wanted to do something else. What I'd identified in my work as an agent, I guess, for speakers, was that some of the events I sent my speakers to were not the most inspirational or enjoyable experiences. And generally the speakers that I sent were the highlight of the day. And I wondered why business events were like that. Because actually I saw an opportunity for creating a company that delivered really exciting business events. So when I think about events, I think about them with three important criteria. The first criteria is the event has to impart useful information, cutting edge content, new ways of thinking and doing, which is pretty obvious.
Yes.
And a lot of events do that. But I saw two other critical ingredients that were often missed at business events. So the second one is inspiration. Why would you go to an event if you're not going to be inspired by the people presenting and imparting information? It's so important, whatever you're talking about, to do so with passion and inspire the people in the audience.
Yes.
And then thirdly, I wondered why events weren't fun. Why is it that people go to an event and feel like they're losing the will to live? It shouldn't be like that. You should go to an event and enjoy it. It should be fun. I'm not saying you should listen to a bunch of comedians, but you learn when you're having fun. Storytelling is so important. And I think when a lot of people think about business events and are asked to go to one, they think it's like a punishment. They go, why me? Can't somebody else go? But when they come to a London Business Forum, they actually discover that business events can be inspiring, fun, and full of great ideas. And if you could do that, then of course people go away and go, that was great use of my time, you should go to one. And then all of a sudden, you're building that brand, you're building that reputation for delivering events that are really good use of people's time. Because time is so critical now, we all thought that with the advent of technology, we'll all have loads more time. We don't, we have less time. So time is so valuable, so we're very, very mindful of how we use that valuable time. When people come to our events, we are acutely aware of how critical their time is and how important it is that we make sure they go away with a spring in their step and a smile on their face, and that they come back hopefully.
And London Business Forum is very successful now, but at one point it wasn't, and I was told that you lost about £250,000 from your first event. So what was that experience like?
Well, I think when you start anything, you have to be very, very passionate and determined. So when we ran the first London Business Forum, arguably our finest ever event. I mean, people that came to that event still talk about it now. It was 15 years ago. It really was an extraordinary experience. I mean, the first thing we did was sit our delegates in a symphony orchestra. And we deconstructed a Brahms concerto, and people wept. They were moved. They experienced emotion perhaps that they'd never experienced before. It's a little bit like taking managers as they came in, managers and directors, putting them through an orchestra and turning them into humans for the day.
Yes.
So it was an extraordinary experience, and the entire day was quite unusual, quite radical, quite different. So on some levels it was hugely successful. On other levels it was an utter disaster, and certainly financially it was an unmitigated disaster. We lost a huge amount of money. But I was determined and I believed it would work, but our formula needed to be developed, and actually it probably took about 3 or 4 years to really get the London Business Forum to a place where it became a sustainable and successful model on all levels, including financial. But I'm a great believer in business that the best way to move forward is by jumping in the deep end.
Yes.
Now, some big companies probably wouldn't like the idea of jumping in the deep end, but I, as an entrepreneur running a relatively small company, I love jumping in the deep end. You find out what's going to happen. I like to swim most of the time.
Yeah.
Occasionally I sink and struggle to come back up for breath. But that is what life is about. It's about taking risks. And as I've got older, you could argue I take more calculated risks. Perhaps I don't jump in to water that was quite as deep as that first year. And that for me is what life is all about. It's about taking risks and doing things that make you feel alive. And that's what that first event was. Yes, it lost a lot of money and I had to remortgage my house. But that investment eventually paid back. But it's typical when you start something, this is particularly true for entrepreneurs, when you start something, most people will not believe in you. They'll say that's a silly idea, that's a stupid idea, don't do that, it won't work. You have to have that sort of channel vision that you believe in it. And it's like a curve, first of all people don't believe you, and then as you work hard at it and make it work and things start to go your way, then they'll start to say, oh well, maybe it was a good thing for you to do, maybe it was the right decision. Then eventually everyone says, oh well, obviously it worked, it was always a brilliant idea. You kind of go through this 3-stage process where eventually people go, oh well, of course you did the right thing. But the entrepreneur has to have that belief, that vision. If you don't believe in it, no one else is going to.
And you spoke about what's important for events, but what do you look for in speakers?
So in terms of speakers, I'm looking for the same 3 things that I mentioned earlier when it comes to events. I'm looking for a speaker that of course is an expert in what they talk about. That's a bit like going to a restaurant expecting the food to be good. Of course it should be good. So you've got to have that expertise, you've got to have that knowledge, the depth of knowledge in whatever it is that you're addressing. But like the events, you need 2 other magic ingredients. You've got to be inspirational. You've got to have that passion for your subject. Don't get up there and pretend that you're reading the news.
Yes.
That's not really going to inspire people. People haven't come there to listen to you reading out a script. And if you need to read a script, you're not as expert as perhaps you should be. because real expertise and real presentation prowess comes from being able to communicate directly with the delegates. If you've got to rely on PowerPoint slides to remind you what you're going to say or read a script, you're not ready to be on the stage.
Yes.
You think about it. If you're down the pub with your friends, you don't bring a script or a PowerPoint presentation with you when you're telling a story. It's your story. It's yours to tell. So, that's the way I try and tell speakers, if they're using scripts or they're over-relying on technology, you're not ready yet. You're not ready. You probably are, but you need the confidence. And confidence comes from storytelling. Tell your own stories. Bear in mind, the audience doesn't know what you're going to say. Sometimes speakers get a little bit obsessed with, I must include every single thing I've ever researched in this speech. That's not a good way of doing it. Actually, less is more. Saying 2 or 3 things brilliantly is much better than saying 30 things in a really bad way. Making your audience go away with just 2 or 3 nuggets is presentation magic. So that passion, that belief in whatever it is you're talking about, but also a sense of humour. And a sense of humour doesn't mean tell a joke at the beginning and tell a joke at the end to wake your audience up. That's not humour. What I'm talking about humour is storytelling. Things that have happened to you that illustrate serious points. And they're your stories, so you can tell them in your way. That is critical. So those are the 3 things: content, inspiration, and sense of humour. That's what I'm looking for from speakers. It sounds easy, doesn't it? It's actually very hard to find all 3 in one person.
So you have your product and you have your speaker. How has it become so successful for you to get people to these events?
Well, I think partly, as we were discussing earlier, most people, when they think of business event, think of it as almost like a death sentence, like, please don't send somebody else. But actually, if you can create an environment and an event that people know is going to be really good use of their time, that they are going to go away happy, full of new ideas, new ways of thinking and doing, then you're onto a winner. And actually, in business events, that's quite easy, because in a sense, most business events are not very inspiring. They're not very fun. Often they do have good content, but people have to work so hard to get it. People learn best when they're enjoying themselves, when they're engaged, when there's interaction. So we've kind of carved out a niche for ourselves. We're known as a company that likes to do things a little bit differently. I'll give you some examples. In the past we built a boxing ring, and we've had arguably the world's biggest guru, Tom Peters, come into the auditorium wearing a boxing gown, with his name on the back, and we've had Richard Skase fighting him. Not a physical fight, but a fight over ideas. Daring to do things a little bit differently pays dividends. We've done events in nightclubs with girl bands coming on halfway through. We've taught people how to juggle. We've taught people how to play the recorder. We've done all kinds of things that you wouldn't typically expect an event to do. We have a product called the 80-minute MBA. We were looking at MBAs and we thought, 3 years, £20,000, good grief. Surely we could do this cheaper and faster. So we thought, maybe we can cram an MBA into an afternoon. And we thought, well, actually, maybe we could do it in 80 minutes. So we created the 80-minute MBA. It covers all the core syllabus of an MBA program, but instead of 3 years, we do it in 80 minutes. You still get a certificate at the end, and unlike most MBA programs, we also give you a free mug. So, doing things like that, it's irreverent, and business schools criticise us and say, you can't do an MBA in 80 minutes, this is outrageous, but they're kind of missing the point. So we're not trying to replicate London Business School. It's more of a taster session.
Yes.
And yes, we have fun, and it's inspiring. And if anything, it probably encourages people to go away and think about perhaps doing a longer, more expensive MBA. So I think business schools should be supporting us, not criticising us.
I suppose that's like a film trailer.
Exactly.
In a way, yes.
Exactly.
So, why do you think people come to your events, and what has the feedback been over the years about your events?
Well, I think if you work in a big company, typically you are under a lot of pressure. So typically the people that attend our events are middle to senior level management. We're not going for the chief executive, we're not going for the board really, we're going for people that are below that level. And these people are the guys at the coalface doing the hard stuff, having to do the implementation of the vision from the top. And certainly at the moment, they're being asked to do more and more with less and less. So they're under a lot of pressure. So what they're looking for is very practical tools and techniques to help them do their job more effectively. So that might be leadership. People aren't typically taught how to lead. Some people say, well, are leaders born or made? Well, obviously it's a bit of both. I mean, you can be a natural leader, but if you're not a natural leader, there's no reason why you can't improve your leadership skills. And people like David Taylor help to do that. Think of it like golf. You know, how are you going to improve your game? We'll take some lessons and do a lot of practice. Does that mean you're going to be Jordan Spieth? Well, no, probably not, but you're going to improve. And it's like anything in life. If you want to be a better speaker, go on a course. Learn about it. Practice. You will get better. It's the same for anything in life. So what I think our events do is help people with practical ways, thinking and doing, changing. But of course we can only provoke people into thinking about what might work best for them. We don't have magic wands. I mean, progress and success personally and professionally comes from hard work.
Yeah.
That's where success comes from. And we like to think that our events can play a role in helping people on that journey, personally and professionally. And like I said earlier, we do have a reputation now that when somebody comes to an event, they go away thinking, actually I really enjoyed that, and I didn't expect to. Because people being sent to a business event don't generally think, why have I got to come? You know, they think they're being punished. But actually great events are not punishing, they're enjoyable. And I get buzzed out of doing it. My favourite part of my role at London Business Forum is coming up with the ideas. You know, what do people need? Coming up with new, fresh ideas of what we might do, I find really exciting and inspiring. So one of our favourite kind of periods is when we're planning, which we're doing at the moment actually, we're planning 2018 to 2019. So we plan a very long time in advance, thinking about what are the things that people need to be able to do their job better and more effectively. And of course at the moment we have the uncertainty of Brexit, which means that people are a bit kind of in limbo because we're not quite sure how the world's going to be. So we need to help people prepare for that future.
And when we're thinking about a great event, who's been your best speaker or the best event you've run?
Well, we've had over 350 events since we started, so it's hard to narrow down one speaker, but I guess if I had to choose one speaker, then I would probably choose Sir Ken Robinson, who now lives in Los Angeles and is a very famous guru, author of The Element. But years ago I was Ken's agent for a number of years. And what Ken is able to do is very, very unusual because he has the academic rigour that you need to be an intellectual, but he also has the skills of a stand-up comedian. And he takes people on this extraordinary roller coaster where he has them in the palm of his hand, one moment challenging them intellectually, and the next moment have them cry with laughter. It's an extraordinary skill, and if people have not listened to Ken Robinson, I recommend that they look him up, probably listen or watch either of his TED Global Talks. They are both an extraordinary 20 minutes. It just shows you how much you can pack into a short period of time. How many times have we spent in business events listening to somebody just wishing that it would end? But actually, you watch Ken Robinson, 20 minutes will go by like less than a minute. They're extraordinary experiences, and that's the power of speaking. That's why I love what I do. I mean, it sounds like a simple thing, but to have that ability to inspire and entertain people in the way that Ken does is extraordinary. I love to find speakers like Ken, but there's not very many of them. Definitely,
no, it's a must watch. So how has your network increased over the years of running the London Business Forum?
So I guess we have kind of two sides to our network. So we have one network which is our client side. So they are the corporations that send their people to our events to be inspired. And we have a particular focus on larger corporations. So we have kind of package models that are more credits people buy, the bigger the discount. So we try and very carefully cultivate our relationships with those kinds of companies. And of course, every time we do an event and people go back to the company and say, that was a great event, they're effectively doing our internal marketing within those companies. Because that also means we're only ever as good as our last event. So we're constantly building our networks and creating relationships with the people that physically come to our events. So that's obviously, if you're in business, everything is about finding and keeping customers. That's the most important thing you do. Everything else involves you in cost. You must always think about how you're going to find and keep customers. So that's our most important network. Because on the other side, we have another network, which is a network, you might say, our kind of content network, which would include our speakers, but also the kinds of organisations that might work with speakers on content. So a very core part of our network is developing relationships with publishers. So when somebody publishes a new book on an area that's going to be of interest to our client network, we want to know about it because we want to make sure that we're presenting the latest cutting edge content to our client networks. We kind of have a content network and a client network, and both of which we need to constantly develop and keep up to date and fresh. I think it's a really good lesson for all businesses, whether you're a small business or a big business. The quality of your networks are critical, and just because you have the information at a moment in time doesn't mean that the information is going to be accurate in 6 months' time. I think something that a lot of businesses struggle with is sometimes you have to cut people out of the network. Yes. If they're not generating results, however you measure results, there is huge value in cutting as well as building. And people sometimes just think, no, keep building, make the network bigger and bigger. Not always. You need the right people in the network. So I think sometimes people have to be quite ruthless in terms of saying, well, actually, that part of the network is not working, so we're not going to focus on that anymore. You have to be. Especially if you're a small company, you have limited resources, you've got to make sure you're focusing on the right bits.
Excellent point. Like you said, time is becoming less and less, so you have to be ruthless like that. In terms of, are you looking to continually expand your network, and how do you get to these speakers, for example?
So it's through a wide range of techniques. I mean, we're constantly monitoring what's going on in terms of new books, for example. So there's a magazine called Bookseller, which we read every week. We're always looking for new cutting-edge content. We'll keep in touch with business magazines, like Management Today, to see who they're profiling, what's going on in business. Through our own network, the content network that I was describing. So, obviously we're very friendly with David Taylor, the Naked Leader. Sometimes David might have an idea of somebody he's seen somewhere in the world that he thinks might be relevant, And other speakers might do the same. They might say, I've seen somebody that I think might interest you. So we're very lucky to, in a sense, have almost an army of supporters around the world that might come back and say, I've seen someone that I think might be of interest to you. So we're constantly trying to identify new people. But it is hard. Whatever it is that you're trying to discover, it's hard to find, talent, because we're all in a war for that talent. So our talent's quite specific. We're looking for inspirational people with things to share to business. It's quite specific, it's quite niche. So it's a constant battle to identify that talent. So each year when we do a program, we're always looking to have at least half the program of new people that we haven't presented before. Otherwise our client network will start saying to us, why are you having the same people again and again?
Of course.
It can be easy to go, well, we've had that person, we know that person's great, successful, so we just keep repeating. I mean, we do repeat some things. So the 80-minute MBA, for example, we do every 9 months, on a rolling basis. But the rest of the program, generally, we're always trying to reinvent and present new people. So it's a constant battle. So if anybody's listening to this and has an idea of a great speaker they see, do get in touch and let me know.
Of course. Just with the 80-minute MBA, why 9 months and not 12 months, as probably people would expect?
So we do that every 9 months just because it kind of developed that way. We were doing it annually, and actually, if we sell out of one and we say the next one's not for 12 months, it just felt slightly too long. So now, for example, we're doing one next week. Doing the 80-minute MBA next week. It's already sold out, but we now have one already prepared for 9 months' time. People can book onto. It kind of feels about right, so it's kind of quite arbitrary, really. But 9 months seems to be working.
That's good. So the £1 million question: do you remember everyone you meet?
I try to remember everyone I meet, but no, I don't. It's really hard. In fact, we're doing a new book that hopefully is going to help people with this challenge, which is all about people skills.
Yes.
It's called 7 Steps to Improve Your People Skills. And one of the things to improve people skills is that remembering people. So, for example, looking at people in the eye is very important, but also trying to remember their name. And it's difficult if you're meeting lots of people. There are some techniques in that book. I mean, an obvious one is that when you meet somebody and they tell you their name, is you repeat their name back to them a couple of times. That really helps with the synaptic connections in terms of getting that information into your brain. But it is hard. What we sometimes do before events, if there are specific people that we want to connect with at the event, we'll look them on LinkedIn. We'll find out what they look like and we'll try and identify them, because there's nothing that's going to make clients feel more important than you saying hello to them by name, knowing who they are. Makes people feel valued and important. So it's a really important skill. I have to say, I'm not great at it, but I'm really lucky that I have a team that are. So I kind of rely on them really to match names to faces.
And how do you form and maintain a strong contact base with someone as a client or even just as a friend?
Yeah. So we have kind of a structure in place in the business. So again, I have a team that is responsible for making sure we're connecting with the client network. So if you want to use technical term, you might say that's CRM. To make sure that those touch points are being used correctly. Because, as I said earlier, we want to find and keep customers. So it's important that you're in touch with them on a regular basis. So, for example, our packages, they renew on an annual basis. So we can't afford to take a package from somebody and then not contact them for a year, hoping they're just going to renew. Those touch points throughout the year to make sure they're happy, they're getting value from what we do is really important. And I think you need processes to do that. And it is actually quite hard work. You can't be complacent about it, because finding and keeping customers is the only thing that keeps you in business.
Yes.
It's absolutely critical. In terms of the other side, in terms of the content network, we do go to a lot of events, we keep in touch, we have a party like we're having tonight, We try and keep in touch with people as much as we can. But again, this isn't rocket science, it's hard work. You know, it doesn't happen by accident, it happens deliberately. You've got to be proactive, you've got to put the work in, and if you do, it will pay dividends.
And how personalised are you with them people in terms of the messages that you're sending out, even if it's just as a company? And yeah, how personalised are they?
We try to be reasonably personalised. I think it is important to segment your client network, so you can't just blast out the same message to everyone. So I think it is quite important to think about what it is you do, how you can segment your networks to connect with them in ways that are going to be most relevant and valuable to them. And again, this takes hard work and thought and process, and sometimes you have to experiment, but you've got to communicate with your network to find out what it is they want, and how you can deliver it in the most effective and valuable way. You know, we keep saying time is so scarce, you know, so make sure that when you're engaging with your network, that they look forward to whatever it is you're sending, rather than dreading it and deleting it. And I think sometimes it's so easy to bash out emails and think, yeah, you know, it's gone to X thousand people. It's gone to X thousand people that have deleted it instantly because they hate getting it, or they've already unsubscribed because they're so annoyed that they don't think it's valuable or has anything of interest to them. It's not working. So you do really need to think about it. And it is hard, especially if you're a small company, you've got limited resource. But it's worth the effort, because if you're delivering that value, it's more likely you're going to keep your customers.
Yes, and what do you recommend for people that are looking to grow their, you know, their career network or their client network?
I think it's good to get out and go to as many networking events as you can. And in London, there are no shortage of events. Depending on which sector you're in, you know, do some work identifying the right kinds of events and organisations that are running events that are relevant to what you do, and try to place yourself in those events. It is hard work because London is a global city. Whatever it is you do, the likelihood is there are events going on in London constantly. I mean, that's why running London Business Forum is a challenge. It's so competitive. Think of all the things you can do in London on any one day. I mean, there's just so much. So you've got to think about, who am I trying to connect with? Where are those kinds of people congregating? How can I most effectively get into those networks and become a part of those networks and add value to the networks? What you don't want to do is turn up at a network and be one of those annoying people that go, why are you here? So it's not just about selling. I think sometimes people can get a bit... You could argue that Americans are quite brutal about this. They'll say hello to you, what do you do? And if you're not of interest to them, they're away, they're gone. Because they're very interested in, what can this person do for me? So I think you need to think creatively about, when you meet people, how might you be able to add value to what it is they do. So if you're in the right networks with people that might be open to the kind of service or product you're offering, think very carefully about how you do it. Don't immediately go into would you like to buy whatever it is you're selling, because that's a bit like an email that's very direct and not targeted. It's going to be instantly deleted, and you won't get a very good reputation. So think about how to meet people and offer them something that's really valuable to create a connection that is actually going to have some continued value. And that's difficult. Difficult. You have to think about it. You need a strategy.
And I think I know the answer to this, but I'd like you to elaborate slightly more. How much of your, maybe in a percentage, how much of your networking is done online compared to face-to-face networking?
Well, we prefer, wherever possible, to do face-to-face networking. Of course, our business model is built on a face-to-face offering. So we're very passionate about the live events. We think it's very important for people to get out of their normal environment and into a different environment. That's why we choose venues that are very inspiring, we tend to choose auditoriums with raked theatres, for example, because then it feels like a show. So that face-to-face time is critical, all about those relationships. So when in our business we're coming up to a renewal for a customer, we want to be sure that the relationship we have with that person that's making the decision is as good and as strong as it can possibly be. Because if that organisation is under pressure, and a lot of organisations are at the moment in terms of Brexit, in terms of not knowing exactly where the future is going to be, and perhaps stalling spending whilst we're not quite sure how the world's going to be, we want to make sure that our contact in that organisation is going to fight hard for us to convince the organisation that the investment they're making with us is valuable. And I think that's what you've got to think about when it comes for that purchase decision. How can you make sure that your contacts in whichever company you're dealing with is on your side? And if you can do that, you've got the best chance possible of that company staying with you and continuing to spend money with you. If you can do that, you've got a tremendously successful business. Because then you're constantly trying to build on it rather than losing customers and constantly trying to replace them, in which case you're just treading water. You're not going anywhere. So in terms of building a business, best way to do it, find and keep the customers, and of course try and find new customers too and keep them, and then the company's always growing.
And how would you, within that connection, within that workplace, how would you build up that rapport with someone like that?
So I guess we're quite lucky in a sense that we have quite a defined marketplace. So what we do is typically dealt with by learning and development, HR training within companies. So our priority is creating relationships with those people. And we're lucky we're able to do that through our events. So we typically meet people face to face at the events. But if we're trying to build new relationships, an obvious way we might try to do that is to invite a new person to an event, to experience the event itself, but also to consolidate that personal relationship with us. So one of my team will have responsibility to try and create a really good relationship with that person. That is the best way of trying to ensure that we might end up doing business with that company.
Yes.
It's all about relationships. You can't just rely on your product or service being so amazing, so brilliant that people will just buy. If you're lucky, maybe they will. If you're Apple, maybe relationships aren't as important as the quality of the product, but I think they're the exceptions. I think most of us, mere mortals, have to create relationships with people. That's the most important way of trying to generate business.
So how often do you communicate with your network, and how do you often do that?
So we'll typically keep in touch with our network, perhaps in an email environment about once a month. Years ago we emailed people more, and we discovered that this wasn't adding value to them. So through talking to our client base and thinking about what was most effective, we reduced the amount of communication. Which is another really important message. Sometimes less is more. Don't over communicate.
Yeah, I agree.
Don't
with that.
bombard people, because they won't thank you, because it keeps coming up, but time is scarce. So when you do communicate with people, you want to ensure that they value that communication, that they'll find time for it, that it's relevant, it's well timed, really, really important. So we don't communicate, in a kind of email sense more than once a month. In terms of how we connect with them throughout the year, that depends on kind of monitor how they're using their credits and how they're coming to different events. So it's quite easy for us to identify which customers perhaps aren't as engaged as they should be, and then we do our best to try and engage them so you're not using your credits, so you're not getting the value out of the investment you've made with us, and try and get them engaged. Which sometimes is hard because they're all so busy, so their relationship with us is a small part of many relationships that they're managing on behalf of whichever company they work for. So it all boils down to making sure that what you're doing is valuable to them, in which case they'll make time for you because they see the value.
So just for a scenario, we were at a London Business Forum event, and I know who's coming. I've done the research in terms of looking on LinkedIn to find what they look like, for example. And how do I grab someone's attention very early on if it's the first time I'm meeting someone?
Well, if you're at a London Business Forum indeed, or any event, it's always quite a good idea to get there early.
Yes.
As you get there early, it's much easier, I think, to start a conversation with someone. And of course, if you're looking for somebody specific, it depends what time they arrive. So it is quite tricky if you want to spot somebody specifically. But if you're just generally trying to build your network and meet new people, I think it's a good idea to get to an event early. Because if you get to an event when it's already going, you tend to find that there are sort of clumps of people around. It's much more difficult to enter those conversations. Now, some people are very good at this. And in fact, we sort of every other year we'll do an event around networking. So what are the tools and techniques that you can use to be a better networker? I find it quite difficult, and I think a lot of people do, in terms of trying to get into a conversation. If there's a group of people that already they're comfortable, they're talking to each other, it's quite hard to get in there. But there are tools and techniques that you can use to be better. It's like anything. If you want to be better, you have to do more of it. And you have to be prepared to learn from somebody that can help you with tools and techniques. But you've got to want to do it. That's the thing about networking. Some people don't actually like it. If you don't like it and you don't want to do it, it's not going to work. You've got to genuinely want to do it and be better at it. And if you are, then there are tools and techniques that you can pick up that will help you connect with people more effectively.
So since you run that event on networks, what would be your biggest tip, whether it's a strategy or some sort of technique, to being good and useful within networks?
I think asking open-ended questions is always very important. So think about your opening questions of what you're going to ask somebody. What you're trying to find is something that really fires them up. So sometimes it's a personal question, but sometimes saying, do you have children? If they say yes, then that will often set them off, and you'll create a personal relationship quite quickly by talking about something like that. In business terms, it might be, what do you do? What do your company do? Something like that. Make sure you're asking open-ended questions.
Yes.
Again, it just takes a little bit of thought. Think about what you ask before you go, rather than trying to dream it up when you arrive. So a bit of planning in advance. And you should definitely buy a copy of People Skills as well when it comes out, because this will be really helpful for this.
Definitely. No, definitely will. So what's next for you and the London Business Forum?
Well, steady as she goes, really. I think as things are right now, I think the market's quite challenging for us, and I suspect it is for lots of other companies, because you could argue that investing in events and sending people on personal development courses is a discretionary spend, that actually it's something that companies can fairly easily cut. Obviously, I would say that's a false economy, because when you're going into challenging times, the people that are going to get you out of it are the people that are working for you. So this is a time when I would argue you need to invest in your people even more, because they're the ones that are going to come up with creative ideas, and they're the ones that are going to come up with the innovation to be able to implement new ways of making sure your company moves forward effectively and profitably. So whatever you do, don't skimp on personal development right now. Even as we're moving into this uncertain period, and we're not quite sure how our economy is going to be structured in 18 months or the next 2 to 3 years, because of all these negotiations with the European Union, regardless of what your politics are on it, invest in your people. Make sure you give yourself the best chance of ensuring you get through this successfully. And definitely, send everyone to a London Business Forum. That's what I would do.
Certainly, definitely. I mean, people always focus on retaining customers because recruiting a new customer is expensive, but it's no different to staff. You know, recruiting staff is now incredibly expensive, hence the reason the recruitment market is one of the booming markets, especially in the UK right now. So I totally agree with you, and the London Business Forum is certainly a more affordable, efficient and high quality way of doing that for companies. So I can certainly see why it's so successful, and hopefully it keeps growing for you.
Thanks, Karl.
No problem at all. So let's finish with 10 quick fire questions.
Okay.
And this is how we finish every podcast.
Okay.
You seem a bit nervous.
I didn't know this was coming. I didn't scroll down to this.
That's absolutely fine. So, you ready?
Yeah.
So what turns you on professionally?
A truly amazing speaker, which happens quite rarely, but when I see somebody for the first time and they're truly wow,
Yes.
that turns me on professionally.
Excellent. What turns you off professionally?
What would turn me off is somebody with 100 PowerPoint slides reading from a script.
How do you unwind?
I unwind. I like to go to the cinema once a week. I like riding my bicycle. I recently did Ride London. Next weekend I'm cycling from London to Brighton. I find cycling a great way of relaxing and being out in the fresh air.
What profession other than your own would you like to try?
I would like to have been a professional cricketer.
Did you play when you were younger?
I did play when I was younger, and I did have a trial for Dorset, the minor county of Dorset, but I wasn't quite good enough. But I would love to have travelled around the world playing cricket. That would be like my dream job.
Certainly. What activity gives you the most energy?
I would say my cycling is what I enjoy doing, and I'm not sure it gives me energy. I think it does. I mean, it doesn't always feel like that when I've done a very long endurance ride.
Yes.
But quite quickly after, I do feel energised by it. So I feel it very a very motivating experience to do those endurance rides. I mean, generally around London, I'm on a Boris bike, but the weekend I'll be on my Cannondale riding around somewhere outside of London.
Who is your biggest inspiration?
My biggest inspiration would be my parents, who I'm very lucky are still in my life. They've been married for 52 years, and really from the first moments I can remember, they inspired me to believe I could do anything that I wanted to. I still believe that. So I'm very lucky to have them in my life. My father once said to me, "Only dead fish swim in the mainstream." And he's right.
If you had to present a speech right now, what one word would be its subject?
Passion.
You are at your best when you were doing what?
I think I'm at my best when I'm coming up with ideas, so thinking creatively about what the future might hold and trying to come up with solutions to help people deal with that future. That's when I think I'm at my best.
If today was the last day of your life, what one lesson would you impart?
I would say to people, focus on your happiness. We're here for a short time. Every day could be our last, and so don't postpone or delay your happiness and think that work or anything else is more important. Whatever it is that you're passionate about, that you love doing, that makes you happy, don't delay it. Please do it now.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say as the reason he is letting you through the gates?
I'd like to hear that I cared about others as much as I cared about myself. I think that would be a reasonable conclusion to allow me in.
Excellent. And there we go. That is the end. So thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate your
My
time.
pleasure.